you need to understand the definitions of, in this context, what these terms mean. Strategy, as I've now explained, it's all about war fighting, or it's about deterrence. It's about theories, doctrines, and plans for the production, deployment, and use of nuclear weapons to achieve a political objective, right? Your political and military objective. Whether you actually use it or you indicate that you want to, that you will threaten to use it, is a different ballgame. That's a separate part, correct? But that's the purpose. The objective is to align the capabilities of nuclear weapons with political ends and often as a means of deterrence and coercion. Okay, so that is, you need to understand, or you need to have a clear understanding of the meaning of deterrence and coercion as well. In the nuclear security, when you now talk about nuclear security, it's about addressing proliferation or safeguarding through formal means the nuclear mechanisms, materials, and capabilities and technologies. So it involves protecting nuclear and other radioactive materials from theft, sabotage, and other malicious acts. It includes measures to prevent terrorist attacks on nuclear facilities, the illicit trafficking of nuclear materials, and their potential use by non-state actors. Okay, so particularly with respect to Pakistan, when it went nuclear, the Americans had massive concerns with so many non-state actors having. I mean, the state had no control over them. Jaish-e-Mohammed, LET, etc. Could they become a threat to nuclear safety? Correct. And therefore, there was a lot of discussions. So one of the things that come out in the Op Sindoor attack is that the Americans are worried because a significant part of it was in American control, as per some of the claims. How true it is, one doesn't know. But whatever it is, the Americans played a major role in ensuring and in talking with the Pakistanis to ensure that the nuclear material, nuclear capabilities and the warheads are completely under the control of the military, and the chances of falling into the hands of non-state actors is as minimal as possible. So, but the worry is still there. Okay, in terms of proliferation from nuclear security, Abdul Qadir, who was seen as the father of the Pakistani nuclear program, then the International Atomic Energy Agency as well as the Americans got on to him because he was proliferating the nuclear capability. If Pakistan had their delivery vehicles in terms of missiles and ballistic missiles, that technology came in from North Korea. And it is suspected that they traded their missile capability with nuclear weapon capability to North Korea. Right? So this is one of the suspicions. Right now, if Asim Munir has been hosted by Trump, one of the reasons is that Pakistan doesn't provide access to a capability to Iran. Correct? They're trying to prevent that as well. Okay, so that is so they're trying to bring in various aspects, including legal institutions, political measures, in aspect of nuclear security here. Proliferation is straightforward. So you have various mechanisms and tools that the international system employs now to prevent fissile material, proliferation, technology proliferation, and components and centrifuge is the name you would have heard so often. Where does it come from? Everybody don't make their own centrifuges. Somebody is buying components, you assemble and put it across there, correct? The Germans are very well known in that. So all that is being tracked now. So what about strategies now? What are the various elements of the strategy that you need to understand? Okay, we've spoken about why nations go nuclear. You need to be assured of your survivability. You need guaranteed deterrence, correct? All that can take different forms. Okay, as the nuclear capabilities rise, and particularly when the US and Soviet Union were racing ahead with building more and more weapons, so the various concepts then started kicking in. One is the assured destruction. Assured destruction is both sides will launch and no, either of them is not going to survive. So that is an assured destruction part, because each one is having what's known as the megaton missiles. On top of that, another technology that emerged is MIRV, multiple independently targeted re-entry vehicle. Okay, how does a ballistic missile path work? Where does it travel? Does it go into outer space or near space? The ballistic path goes through near space. Okay, or even depending on the range between Russia and the US, you're talking about half an hour of travel time. Okay, between India and Pakistan, it is less than 5 minutes. Okay, so your strategies will get governed differently. Okay, there a ballistic path. If I today you can pick up when a missile gets launched, you can locate where it's been launched from, and based on its initial path itself, you can now predict its complete ballistic path, and from that you can predict where it's going to hit and where it's going to land. So a ballistic path is well known. Correct. That is why this is followed by cruise missiles. Cruise missiles will not follow a ballistic path, but they'll fly along the earth and they can navigate. So for you to understand where it's going to come and hit is difficult. But to make things more complicated, they brought in what's known as the MIRV technology. So as the ballistic missile goes into the space and then it has to re-enter the atmosphere and go towards the target. Before the re-entry, the warhead splits. It carries about 10 warheads or even 12 warheads. And each of those warheads is programmed to go to a particular target. So they will now move in a different direction, right? And you will have 10 of them coming into you from one missile or 12 of them coming to you from one missile. Okay, so that is the MIRV capability. In today's world, China, Russia, and even the Americans have it, and we are also testing it. Is that you have a hypersonic missile, you have glide bombs, and these don't have to follow ballistic path. They can actually navigate, avoid enemy defenses, and go to a target. Okay, so it's a very, very robust technology. The concept of second strike capability comes into the picture. So if the enemy has hit you first, you should be able to absorb that hit, survive, to be able to launch an attack back. That is second strike capability. So if a guy has launched a megaton weapon on you, not much is going to survive. So how will you have a second strike capability? Intelligence is there all the time, active. They may know where your silos are. Most of them are also mobile missiles. Okay, so you can keep moving on. Even then, your ability to do an immediate second strike may be seriously compromised on land. So invariably, for a second strike, robust, viable second strike capability, it has come from the sea. And from the sea, it has come from the submarine. And from the submarine launched ballistic missile. So you have a submarine launched ballistic missile, which will also carry MIRVs, right? And you won't know where that submarine is. These submarines will be nuclear powered submarines. They can remain underwater for as long as 8 months. Okay, and therefore you will not know where it is. And for him to now neutralize your submarine capability is almost impossible. And that gives you the second strike capability. That is why we talk about triad. So there are 3 legs of nuclear capabilities. One is launch from the ground, that is the land version. The other one is to launch from aircraft, which is the air version. The third is the launch from the sea, which is submarine, which is the underwater version, right? All 3 put together, you call it as a triad. Triad is 3 legs. So your second strike capability is feasible only when you have a triad. India has a triad right now. So along with that, countries will also now take on the concepts of no first use. We follow no first use in our doctrine. You develop your doctrine, and your doctrine can be based on first use or no first use. Pakistan says, I'm always threatened by India, so I'm not going to do a no first use. The moment I feel very threatened on my survivability, I'll launch. So Pakistan believes in a first use of nuclear missile. The Chinese, right from the beginning, I told you, Mao Zedong said nuclear weapons are paper tigers, not meant to be used. It is not a weapon of war. And therefore, we will develop to create deterrence, but we will not be the first one to fire a nuclear weapon. Because they have an NFU policy, which they have now modified to say, if there is a threat from a nuclear weapon state, I don't have to follow the NFU, right? So this is an ambiguity they are creating now, right? But India has an NFU very clearly. So when you have an NFU, you have to assure yourself a second strike capability, and you have to have enough capability to be able to impose unacceptable damage on the advisory, the guy who was launched attack on you. That becomes the minimum credible deterrence. A minimum credible deterrence are not fixed. It will vary from time to time based on technology and the capability other side develops. Right? So it is not a fixed number, but it is a capability. You should be able to impose unacceptable damage to the other side. That's the way it is to be done. The weapons consist now of various technologies that involve MIRV, ballistic capability, cruise missile capability, hypersonic capability, and then you have those translated into various missile systems. ICBM is an intercontinental ballistic missile. That means it has a range of about 12,000 to 20,000 kilometers range. The Chinese have just displayed in their military parade 20,000 kilometer range weapon. They also have a weapon system which can actually go around the earth fully, remain in space, and then it becomes launch a glide warhead, which that means you are actually fooling the enemy's air defense system constantly because you're not letting them to know where you're going to come from. Correct? And that's a technology development. Okay, cruise missiles and bombs are air delivered, submarine launched and ballistic missiles, and these all will have to be backed up by ISR, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. That today largely comes from space. There is a 24/7 monitoring of space. Ever since the nuclear age started, now both sides wanted to know where their nuclear silos are placed, where their nuclear capability main centers are located. So they wanted to fly over each other and do that. So because of the space capability, now they would launch satellites. And somebody would say, you're flying over me, I'll shoot you down if I have the capability. So they agreed upon each other, saying that peaceful overfly, which is actually about satellite, is possible, and they agreed. There was a treaty that was signed. That treaty has been also abrogated by the Americans now. Okay. But on the other hand, there were no missiles. If an aircraft could fly, let's say at 60,000 feet, and then carry cameras and fly and monitor, record everything, come back and land, and you assess that, that was happening as well. In the peak of Cold War, I told you the Americans wanted to monitor and do the surveillance. So they had a glider-like aircraft that was developed. It will get launched, reach 60,000 feet, and fly across the Soviet Union into land in a friendly aircraft subsequently. Where was it launched from? Peshawar. That's where Pakistan was. This is in the peak of the Cold War. So he would go from Peshawar, fly over the Soviet Union at 60,000 feet. They had no missiles reaching 60,000 feet. And his very powerful cameras, he would film everything, and land in Finland. And from Finland, they'll take the films, do the analysis, and they would do monitoring of Soviet bases and other things everywhere. Okay, so this is what he was doing repeatedly for a couple of years. Till the Soviets finally got their missile that could now break the 60,000 feet barrier, and they shot him down. So he came down by the parachute, took him prisoner, and then he was a prisoner for more than 10 years or 15 years in Soviet Union. And then they did a prisoner exchange with one of their guys, and then that's how it is. So 60,000 feet, U-2 was no more safe, and therefore they developed another aircraft, SR-71, very powerful engines, twin engines. It looks like a rocket, would fly at 100,000 feet, and at a speed of 3 times the speed of sound, 3.5 Mach. So there was no missile easily that could catch it. No missile would reach 100,000 feet. Today you have even that is possible, you can do that. But they were quite safe. So they fly all over. But now I think they've reduced because missiles have caught up now. In 1980s, Reagan administration started a program called Star Wars, primarily to now look at the locations of ballistic missile launches and kill them at the initial phase itself through laser weapons. So you will position your strong laser-based satellites in near-Earth orbits and track these and then kill them. That was it's like a ballistic missile defense. But it was very expensive. It was a science fantasy. So they poured in a lot of money, but a lot of technologies got developed. It was scrapped by late 80s or early 90s. But all those technologies have now come into the BMD, what's known as the ballistic missile defense. 2000. It is still being tested. Tactical nuclear weapons are for battlefield usage, right? In the theater, now once a war breaks out, it is possible to use a tactical nuclear weapon which can destroy an armored formation, which can destroy your soldiers, but nuclear weapon is still nuclear weapon. So whether you use a tactical nuclear weapon or you use a megaton weapon, the other country will respond with a nuclear weapon. So it is an ambiguous issue. That led to a development of using depleted uranium, which they did in big way in Iraq. And that still has a lot of damage to the people, on the children and everybody else. Okay, in terms of radiation. Dirty bomb is what today any good physicist and chemistry background, strong research guys, if he's in Al Qaeda, he can get the materials put together and make some kind of a nuclear weapon. That is the fear. And they call it a dirty bomb that can actually work. But it's the whole system has been so well controlled that it's actually difficult.